Well, let me say hi to another guest, sir. And then we also have our special guest, Mr. Permana Agung. Good morning,
Yes.
Mr. Permana Agung.
Good morning. How are you today?
I'm very well, sir. And how is yours?
Okay, I'm fine. I just feel a little bit flattered when you guys mentioned about the amazing speakers. I'm not actually amazing speaker. I'm just the ordinary people. Once I finish my job as the Director General of Customs and Excise, now I'm become an ordinary people again. So not amazing people.
Well, but we are so happy to have you here, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And then we have another special guest, Mr. Achmad Sandri. Good morning, Mr. Achmad Sandri.
Good morning, Sulis. I'm very happy today.
How are you, sir?
I'm fine, thank you.
Are you ready, sir, to in this event?
A little bit nervous, you know. Actually, I called Mr. Permana Agung. You know, in karate, we call him Sihan, a master of exercise, and also Mr. Preece. So maybe I'm just give like some kind of like opening, and then Mr. Preece and Mr. Permana Agung will give in-depth explanation about our topic today. I think that's all for Ms. Sulis.
Don't you think that it will be an interesting sharing, Mr. Sandri?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
Okay.
And then let us invite Mr. Nirwala Heryanto as the keynote speaker. Good morning, Mr. Nirwala.
Morning, how are you?
I'm very well, sir. Thank you. Who is yours, sir?
Yeah, and I hope everyone is in good health today.
Yes, thank you, sir. Well, Nabila, are you ready to start the session today?
Oh, yes, of course. We can't wait any longer.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
First of all, let us say thank to God because of His blessing we can gather here in the event of Bicara Together series, 3rd edition, in collaboration with CEEC Inspirational Talk 12th edition and Customs and Excise Office of Kuala Tanjung. With the topic is Excise Extensification, Opportunities and Challenges. Good morning, the Director of Excise, Bapak Nirwala Heryanto, the Head of Customs and Excise Regional Office of North Sumatra, Ibu Oza Olavia, the Head of Customs and Excise Regional Office of Central Java and Yogyakarta, Bapak Patmoyo Triwikanto, the Head of Center for State Revenue Policy, Ibu Pande Putu Oka Kusumawardani, Mr. Eddie De Cooper from Belgian Customs Counselor, our beloved speakers, all the officials of Directorate General of Customs and Excise, the honored guests, and all the participants. Ladies and gentlemen, to start this event, let us pray, hoping this event runs smoothly. Pray begins. Finished. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, let us listen the national anthem of Indonesia Raya.
Thank you. Secondly, before we begin, we would like to remind you to mute your microphone while the explanation is running. And do not forget to put your question when you want to raise the question. You can put on the link as mentioned on the chat room, or you can put directly on it. For the participants who are joining from live YouTube, you can put your question on the live chat box. Thank you so much. And now, without any further ado, let us invite our moderator, Mr. Yudhi Dharma Nauly. Good morning, Mr. Yudhi. How are you today?
I'm fine. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much for your time, sir. We are so happy to have collaboration with Customs and Excise Office of Kuala Tanjung in this event, especially you as the head of Customs and Excise Office there. Thank you for being our moderator today, sir. We hope we can have such kind of collaboration again in the next time with you and the Customs and Excise Office of Kuala Tanjung, of course. Okay, sir, excuse me, before we give the time to you, let me give the time to introduce our amazing moderator today. Okay, please, this screen. Yeah, as you see on the screen, everybody, our amazing moderator today is Mr. Yudhi Dharma Nauly. He received Doctor of Philosophy in Asia Pacific Studies of Risumekan Asia Pacific University in Beppu, Japan. And now, he is assigned of duty as Head of Customs and Excise Office of Kuala Tanjung. That's so amazing, sir. Okay, sir, are you ready to conduct the session?
Yes, of course.
Okay, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Solis and Nabila. This is really an honor for me to serve as the moderator. From the little village of Kuala Tanjung in a remote corner of North Sumatra, I would like to greet all the speakers, the audience, and also the distinguished guests. Thank you all for attending this webinar. Bu Oza Olivia, the head of North Sumatra Custom Regional Office, send her warm regard to you all. She is at the moment engaged in another webinar with the head office, but she promises to join this webinar later. Ladies and gentlemen, our webinar today, as mentioned earlier by Solis and Nabila, is a part of a series of inspirational talks organized by the Custom and Excise English community. This chain of talks present prominent custom officers from the Directorate General of Customs and Excise, as well as from foreign custom administration. Through this talk, we intend to prepare young officers like Solis and Nabila to be the future leaders of the Directorate General of Customs and Excise, as well as to introduce them to the international community. This webinar is also a part of a series of webinars called Cakap Cukai, organized by the Directorate of Excise. This is actually the third session of Cakap Cukai, the series. In the first session, we invited Pak Khatib Basri and Pak Permana Agung, who have laid the philosophy of excise, which serve today as the foundation of our excise policy. In the second session, we invited Bu Artidiatun Aji PhD of the University of Gajah Mada, and also Pak Fit Adrison PhD of the University of Indonesia. Both outstanding scholars took us to go over the dynamics of the contemporary excise policy, and they put forward several opportunities for improvement. Now, today, on the third session, we will discuss how the Director General of Customs and Excise may expand the coverage of excise. We still remember that in the colonial time, we have more accessible goods, namely beer, alcoholic beverages, ethyl alcohol, kerosene, sugar, and of course, tobacco product. Yet today, we only have a very narrow coverage of excise. Compared to other countries, particularly ASEAN members, we are lag behind. With higher demand for financing the development and stronger aspiration to create a better society, expanding coverage of excise is irrefutable. For this webinar, we invite outstanding speakers. Hopefully, they may inspire us and induce us in our quest to generate excise from new goods and probably new services. Honored audience and guests, let us inaugurate our webinar today by hearing the keynote speech. Our keynote speaker today is Pak Nirwala Dwi Heryanto, the Director of Excise. Beforehand, let me introduce him to you. Pak Nirwala was born in Magelang on the 5th of January 1967. He has served in many positions in the Directorate General of Customs and Excise since 1991. His expertise is undoubtedly post-clearance audit, since he had many middle management positions in this area. He was promoted to high-level management position in 2013. He was appointed as the Director of Excise on November 2018. Pak Nirwala earned his master's degree in administration from the University of Indonesia in 2007. Beforehand, he earned his bachelor's degree in development economics from the University of Gajah Mada in 1990. Without further ado, allow me to present you our honorable keynote speaker, Pak Nirwala Dwi Heryanto. Please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Yudhi. Can you hear my voice clearly?
Can you speak louder, sir?
Okay. Okay, can you hear my voice clearly?
Not really clear. If you can speak louder.
Okay, how about now?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. Thank you. The Honorable Rob Preece, Associate Professor and Director of Excise Study and Center of Customs and Excise Studies, New South Wales University. Pak Permana Agung, one of the few excise exports in Indonesia, and was a Director General of Customs and Excise for the period of 1999 to 2002, a practitioner and an academic. Ahmad Sandri, Qurnain as a third speaker on this session, and Yudhi Dharma also as a moderator, and all participants of the 12 CEEC's Inspirational Talk. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good day. I hope everyone is in good health. This morning, I feel honored to greet you and have you in a session covering of topic of excise, especially with the term of excise extensification, opportunities, and challenges that will be discussed with all the great speakers today. As we are all aware, on his second term of presidency, Jokowi has a program toward Indonesia Maju, which is to create developed Indonesia that is sovereign, independent, and with characteristic based on gotong royong or mutual cooperation. One of ways to achieve it is through human capital development. Next slide, please. In the National Medium-Term Development Plan, or RPJMN, for the year 2022-2024, there are 7 development agendas, and they are economic sustainability, lessening inequality, infrastructure development, national character, Polhukam and public services, human development through increasing quality and competitive human resource, and eco-friendly through building the environment, disaster resiliency, and climate change. And the last two agendas are closely related to the topic that we will discuss this morning. But why is human capital so important? As you can see from the slide just now, yeah, it shows that dependency ratio is in 2020 to 2035 will be at its lowest level, meaning that the number of labor force that are ranging from 15 to 64 years old is bigger than the number of non-productive age. Next slide, please. Adding to that, let's take a look at some other notable facts. Firstly, Indonesia's population is at 240 million, which placed Indonesia as the fourth largest population in the world. Secondly, in the 2010-2035, the structure of dependency ratio is decreasing. Again, it meaning that the productive age increased significantly. Therefore, it creates a chance of a demographic bonus. The third, last, is this phenomenon creates a window of opportunity to increase the welfare and improve the economic growth. And how are we going to achieve it? And how do we get to the goal of Indonesia Maju? There are 4 things that needs to be improved in order to get there. Number 1, we need to have a better air quality. The second, we would be better need to have a better water and soil. The third is the need to have healthy people. We need to reduce the consumption of non-healthy food such as sugar, salt, and fat by imposing tax on healthy food, on non-healthy food, starting with sugar sweetened beverages. And the last one is the need to lessen the number of stunting. If we take a look and compare Indonesia to other Southeast Asian countries, we have the least number of excise goods, which were only cigarette and spirits. Moreover, based on the tax ratio on excise, Indonesia also has the lowest figures compared to other countries in the world, which is only 1.2, while Bolivia is at 7.8. Next, please. Therefore, in order to support and reaching the goals of Indonesia Maju, we have currently proposing a new excise object, which are plastic products, excise on emission, sugar sweetened beverages, and other available options such as fossil fuel, salt, sugar, and fatty foods. So to get this started, I do hope that this forum will provide you with a good insight and knowledge to be ideas on extensification of a new excise object. And lastly, I believe that this pandemic will not only give us challenges, but also opportunities for us to refocusing on the resources on the sources of state revenue, especially through excise object extensification. By having extended excise code, I hope that the tax ratio will be increased. Thank you. I hope you make the most hour of this forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Nirwala. It is indeed a very inspirational keynote speech. I believe all the audience are eager to learn more about broadening the excise space. But first, allow me to recap what Pak Nirwala has mentioned. Pak Nirwala mentioned in his speech that the extensification of excise is one strategy in increasing the quality of the environment and human capital in Indonesia. He also told us that broadening the excise base has become a program in the National Medium-Term Development Plan. This indicates the seriousness of the government in the extensification of excise. Pak Nirwala has also stated that a number of goods have been proposed upon which excise will be imposed. Next, we will learn how the Directorate General of Customs and Excise has tried to broaden the excise base through the years. Our next speaker is Pak Ahmad Sandri Qurnain. He may be the youngest among the speakers, yet he has shown the potential to be the future leader in the Directorate General of Customs and Excise. Allow me to introduce him to you all. Pak Ahmad Sandri Qurnain currently serves as the head of section for compliance on accessible goods operator in the Directorate of Excise. Pak Sandri got his master's degree in management from the University of Persada Indonesia in 2009. Earlier, he got his bachelor degree in administration from STIA LAN Jakarta Polytechnic in 2001. He also got a graduate diploma in Customs and Excise from Stan Polytechnic of State Finance in 1996. Pak Sandri got his first promotion to a middle management position in 2012. He holds his current position since 2016. Without any more delay, I present you Pak Ahmad Sandri Qurnain. You please, sir.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, my fellow officers of Customs and Excise, also my fellow officers from Ministry of Finance, and all the participants at today's 12th CEEC's Inspirational Talk, which is collaboratively held with the third Bicara Cukai, the series. I'm definitely honored to be one of the speakers along with two others, Mr. Preece and my mentor, Mr. Permana Agung. They both are the excise expert, so that we can learn a lot from them. Hence, I prefer to pitch my presentation more as an appetizer at this occasion, just before all of us walk through the main course from colleague speakers today. Ladies and gentlemen, I will start my presentation today by quoting Thomas R. Guy in his book, Understanding Public Policy. He stated that public policy is whatever the government chooses to do or not to do. So what do you think of it? That quote may sound interesting, as it can be perceived as an arbitrary decision that the government take every time they decide public policy. and then roll it over. For a colleague from the government, you would have understood the complexities in taking that decision, the various angles to consider, including the risk and the possible impact when the policies are being implemented. In addition to that, the process of making that decision may also be pretty much daunting. It is ups and downs, and sometimes it's like a roller coaster paces of the process might as well be faced to get it done. And talking about that particular winding process that have been experienced in pushing our today's topic, excise intensification, into EVAC, has somehow led me to put a title of my today's presentation: Along the Long and Winding Road, Excise Extensification in Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy.
Usulan pengenaan cukai terhadap produk plastik disetujui oleh Komisi 11 DPR RI.
Di sisi lain, pentingnya peranan cukai sebagai penerimaan negara, yaitu memberikan kontribusi terhadap APBN sebesar 10%.
Kemenkeu sebagai pencetus regulasi menyatakan bahwa pengenaan cukai kemasan plastik merupakan media perluasan benda cukai.
The long and winding road.
In 1999, Plan on Excisable Goods Extensification Policy has been started since May 18, 1999 by conducting seminar on excise objects extensifications and its impact on national economy. And one of the speakers at the seminar was Mrs. Sri Mulyani Indrawati, our Minister of Finance today. From 2003 until 2005, this course has emerged to impose excise duties on optical discs, detergents, and cement. In 2013, there was a discourse of imposing excise on soft drinks, and on that occasion, Mr. Preece, which is our main speaker today, also helped in presenting that matter in front of the Parliament. In 2016, in a meeting, Minister of Finance Bambang Brojonegoro conveyed a discourse of imposing excise on plastic bottles. In the discussion with relevant ministries and entrepreneur associations, there was emerging development that plastic bottles were not appropriate to be subjected to excise because they could be recycled. The next discussion development was imposing excise on plastic bags. In February 2019, the further discussion on imposing excise on plastic bags started again on February 2019 between Minister of Finance and other ministries in an interministerial meeting and started to arrange draft of government regulation or RPP of plastic bags. In August 2019, Minister of Finance and Commission 11 had a work meeting, and one of the agendas was to discuss plan of excise extensification on plastic bags. And the work meeting was continued with representation of Ministry of Industry and directly stated approval on plastic bags. On February 19, 2020, a meeting was held between Minister of Finance and Commission 11, where proposal of imposing excise on plastic bags was delivered. In the discussion, some members of Parliament asked why excise is only imposed on plastic bags. It was said if government wanted to put forward aspect of environment and health, excise on plastic should not only be directed on plastic bags, but also on some other plastic products, such as beverage and instant foods packaging. In the meeting, which lasted for around 3 hours, Commission 11 finally agreed for government to add excisable goods of plastic products.
winding road.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoy my presentation in some kind of video. Let me give to all of you some kind of perception about the opportunities and challenges. Next. The excise revenue in Indonesia, we all knew that has been proven as one of mainstays for revenue, even in times of crisis. According to data of tax income performance for the first semester of 2020, it is noted that customs and excise revenue still grows about 8.8%. Next. I already asked Mr. Permana Agung to give us more review about this data so that we can see that Minister of Finance noted that total of tax income for the first semester has reached 624.9 trillion or 45.5% of the target. This income undergoes contraction or minus 9.4% compared with the same period of the previous year. But meanwhile, customs and excise revenue still grew 8.8%. Furthermore, customs and excise revenue, which grew positive, was supported by the growth of tobacco excise revenue, amounting to 14.2%. Next. I also want to share to all of you about DBHCHT. The Tobacco Excise Profit Sharing Fund, or DBHCHT, in Indonesia is an example of manifestation from earmarking concept in excise. I also hope Mr. Permana Agung will give us more about that, give us more in-depth explanation about this concept. Because today, the biggest utilization of DBHCHT is for health sector. One of them is to cover BPJS lack of funds. And the late news that I heard from the government of Karawang that the regional government of Karawang utilized DBHCHT, which they received to build pulmonary special hospital. And now is being optimized to take care of COVID-19 patients. So can we imagine if imposition of excise is on the other goods, let's say sweetened drinks, which is object of excise because of its negative impact on health, then there is a chance for government to get additional financing for health sector, especially in the moment like this, in the crisis moment. Next. I also want to give a picture to you all about how the regional government of Karawang built a special hospital that came from the DBHCHT. Next. About I also want to share that now we can see that emerging citizens' awareness to reduce consumption of products that have negative impact. We have it. There was a petition that encouraged government to impose excise on plastic bags, which was initiated by one of our public figure, Nadia Mulya. Next. So you can see that I think our society is very different now. They know that we have to control our consumption, and they propose our minister to impose excise on plastic bag. Isn't that interesting? Next. Mr. Justinus Prastowo in our previous seminar said that law number 39 on excise gives hope for the implementation of excise extensification. But sometimes sectoral ego and different interests, interrelevant ministries and agencies become barriers. From so many discussions that we have been done with stakeholders regarding excise extensification, one question which is quite difficult to answer, that if excise purpose is indeed to reduce consumption, can it be convinced that after an object is imposed by excise, then there will be consumption reduction? I also hope Mr. Permana Agung will have a deeply explanation about this. So the main issues about the public policy of how to impose excise on new object is how to convince the stakeholder, let's say relevant ministries or agencies, parliament, businessmen, and especially citizens as excise payers, that imposing excise on certain objects will bring advantage for people welfare. I think that's all my presentation for today. As I said before, it's just an appetizer to the main course. I give the time back to moderator. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Pak Sandri. Allow me to sum up what Pak Sandri has delivered just now. First, Pak Sandri comments by underlining the importance of excise revenue in the government budget. He also mentioned that the emerging citizens' awareness to reduce consumption of products which have negative impact. Next, his long and winding road presentation is a good presentation indeed. Inform us about the struggle to impose excise on plastic bags. And lastly, in the end of his presentation, he has drawn our attention to the biggest problem in extensification of excise, which is how to convince our stakeholders that imposing excise will actually improve our welfare. My beloved guests and audience, let us continue our webinar today by presenting the second speaker. Our next speaker is Professor Rob Preece. I met Rob the first time in Canberra in June 2015 during the Custom Leadership Development Program. Afterward, we organized several activities regarding excise, including a visit by officials of the Directorate of Excise to Royal Thai Excise Department in December 2015. Respectable guests and audience, allow me to introduce him. Professor Rob Preece was born on the 22nd of 1966. He is currently works as Associate Professor for the Center for Customs and Excise Studies, CCES, in Sturt University, Canberra. He also works as a visiting professor teaching indirect taxation in Shanghai Customs College. I really hope that he will also serve as visiting professor in our Customs Academy in Jakarta. For your information, our colleagues from the Academy has given a visit to CCES in 2017. Professor Rob Preece has just earned his PhD from Sturt University in 2018. He also holds a master's degree in International Custom Law and Administration from the University of Canberra in 2007. He got his bachelor degree in Justice from Edith Cowan University in 1989. Our speaker is definitely qualified in excise matters, no doubt about that. He worked closely with the Royal Thai Excise Department under a unique partnership between the department and the CCES for more than. During this period, he has stationed within the Royal Thai Excise Department. He involved in research and policy development, ministries of finance in countries like Poland, Tanzania, and Myanmar, as well as with the World Bank. He has published a number of papers and books regarding excise policy. He is regularly asked to talk about excise policy in conferences, seminars, and symposiums by parliaments, government bodies, universities, and international institutions. We are certainly very fortunate today to have him as our speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Professor Rob Preece.
Well, thank you very much, Yudhi, and I always have very fond memories of your course in Canberra. I can assure everybody that Yudhi was a top student.
Thank you.
Yeah, so as Yudhi mentioned, I was very lucky to spend 12 years in Southeast Asia, based in Bangkok, and worked most of the time inside the Royal Thai Excise Department, and has given me a great insight into policy making in the region, and I hope to share some of that with you today. Now, I do have a PowerPoint presentation I'm going to share very carefully, because on a late night Zoom last week to Tanzania, I accidentally shared my email screen and had everybody laughing as they were reading my emails rather than reading my PowerPoint slides. And as Yudhi mentioned, I have been lucky also to be invited to speak in many conferences in the region, and several of those have been in Indonesia as well. So I've been to Jakarta many times, and I've been to the Excise Department and the Fiscal Policy Office several times in my career. So I have a little bit of a understanding of your challenges and problems. I've seen very good excise proposals get stood up and then crash down again. I also like to congratulate Sandri on your presentation. I think I'm very close to signing you up for a job as a lecturer in our university, because that was a fantastic way to present your topic. Very, very creative. Also, a very nice welcome to my other speakers and of course the participants. And I congratulate everybody who's put this together. It is a really fabulous opportunity to share. So I have been given about 45 minutes. So I've got a little bit of structure that we will follow to make sure I can finish in time. Before I charge straight into talking about excise across ASEAN, I will take you back just to introduce you or reintroduce you to the principles of excise and why it's such a different tax to other taxes we have, and that can be a starting point for seeing what types of goods and services might be more suitable than others to come into the excise tax system. As well as looking at excise in ASEAN today, I'll give you a little bit of history and talk about some of the trends that have been happening across the region since I've been there. So I've been active in Southeast Asia since 2004, and I'd like to share what I've seen in that time with you. And that will be a good starting point then into the last topic, where I talk about some of the policy development that I've been involved with, almost like a case study as we finish up and show you some of the tools and talk about some of the projects that I've been lucky enough to be involved with. Let's go back to the beginning, Excise 101, maybe we could call this. So excise is a very narrow-based tax. It's only on a few goods and services. It's applied in addition to VAT. So some goods have to pay 2 lots of tax. And if you import goods, you might have customs duty as well. So might be 3 layers of tax: customs, excise, and VAT on some in goods. So it's usually not very good policy to have 2 or 3 levels of tax. So we look at why excise is justified in being an extra layer of tax. And that is because these few goods and services cause harm when they're consumed. And when they cause harm, there's a cost to the economy that we have to pick up, whether that be in hospitals or a police force or ambulance, whether we're doing damage to the environment through pollution, whether we're destroying roads by driving around in cars. And not only is excise looking at that, it's also looking at it in a fair way, because it's the people who are drinking, smoking, driving, gambling. These are the ones paying excise, not the people who don't consume. So it's an equity, or a user pays, a fair way of raising revenue to cover those costs. Now, because excise is linked to this cost of harm, we see a different style of taxation. We normally, like a VAT, we see excise, a tax on the percentage of a value. But excises are linked to the harm. So those excise rates look like per kilogram, per litre, per pack, per cigarette, or cubic metre. And the tax rate there usually links directly to the harm. We call this concept Pigouvian taxes. Arthur Pigou was a famous professor who said, wouldn't it be a good and fair way to have taxes like excise and environmental taxes, eco taxes, green taxes, paid by people who are doing harm, and therefore those people are contributing to the cost of fixing that harm. However, excise is also a very, very old tax. In the records, there's signs of excise over 600 years ago in places like England, in Europe. And excise in those days was purely about raising revenue, nothing else, just about raising revenue. And as people studied that, they found that the best types of goods to raise revenue through excise were fast-moving consumer goods. So goods we don't need, these are goods that we want, and we consume them every day. So again, we find things like cigarettes and alcohol and fuel caught up in the same principle here. People drink or smoke each day. Now, in addition, to be effective as a revenue tool, the goods that you put in the excise system have to be what we call price inelastic. So I'm going to assume that everybody here doesn't have a master's in economics. So this means that consumers are not worried about a price rise. So if you put a tax on a product, or increase the tax on a product, and it goes up by 10% in retail price, well, consumption might only fall by 3, 4, or 5%. So therefore, you still have a solid base of goods coming through that will be paying tax. Importantly, there has to be no substitutes that are not taxed. So if you have excise on alcoholic beverages, well, you can't just have excise on beer and wine and no excise on ethyl alcohol, like whiskey, because people will just drink whiskey and they won't drink the taxable item. So if there's a substitute, it has to be taxed as well. And Professor Frank Ramsey was the main man to discover these characteristics for a successful excise, and so we call this the Ramsey rule. Putting goods in your excise system to raise revenue based on those 3 criteria. Now, what I'd like to do now is just link that to what we see in the Indonesian law on excise. So I'm referring to law number 39 of 2007, and I'm going to go straight to Article 2, and those underlines there are from me. And Article 2 talks about goods that will come into the excise system on the basis that you need to control their consumption, supervise their distribution. These goods might have negative impacts on communities and the environment, or we need them from justice and equilibrium. And if you think back to my last slide, right there, the Indonesian law on excise, Article 2, captures perfectly the Pigwavian tax, the goods which have harm when consumed, and so therefore need some form of management of their supply and consumption. I also want to flag for you Article 5, which is a strange, I haven't seen this in anyone else's excise law. This is basically putting a revenue target against you each year for excise collections. And I think it was Mr. Nauly made an excellent point about we have to think a bit more broadly about excise than just pure revenue. As we saw in Article 2, excise is there to help us control consumption of certain harmful goods. And by putting an excise on a product, in some cases we're hoping to reduce consumption, and therefore we would be reducing revenue. I can give examples of a very large cigarette increase in Australia which reduced excise collections on tobacco. If we had excise on plastic bags here in Australia, it would get zero excise revenue because we've moved to a zero plastic bag policy across Australia already. So just interesting. And I also get a bit worried if you don't meet your revenue target, how all the excise officers are breaking the laws. I hope not. I hope not. All right, so just a quick slide here, staying with the principles, because as I talk about policy development tools later on, I probably need you to understand what's going on here. So excise is an indirect tax. So it's built into the price of the goods and services that we buy. And it's almost acts like a lever. So you'll see I have two cost structures here. So two goods, one made locally, domestic, and one imported. It's a liquid. It could be wine, it could be beer or spirits, or it could be perfume or soft drink. But we find there's different components to the retail price. And there in the third line up, but the dotted line there is a component called excise. So if you add that, or if you increase the size of the excise, well, the manufacturer or the importer needs to keep their profit margins as close as the same as possible. So they'll have to increase the price of the product. So as excise increases, the retail price goes up, and then consumers get what we call a price signal. So the consumer sees an increased price, and that increased price has come because excise tax is trying to tell the consumer, hey, when you consume this, there is harm, and the economy has to pay for that harm. And so we're going to get you to pay for that harm by including excise in your product. And now you make some choices. And hopefully, if it's drinking and smoking and dangerous behaviours, well, people will cut back. They'll see that price rise, and they'll cut back on the levels of smoking, or cut back on the levels of drinking, won't drive the car unnecessarily, and so on. And as we'll discuss later, drink less sugar, use less plastic bags. So that's the main concept of how excise is going to work for us a bit later on in the session. Let's have a quick look at our ASEAN partners now. So I'm not sure if you saw there that my PhD was actually on ASEAN excise tax policy. And I was very interested in that topic as the 10 member states work towards the AEC, which started in December 2015, because out there are 10 very, very different excise tax systems, and I just wondered what would happen when you opened up your borders with free trade between each other. So I was very, very focused on that question. But I had to do a lot of mapping, of course, and I'd like to share with you a snapshot of excise tax across ASEAN. And I've got 3 categories here. So excise applies to all of these 3 categories in all 10 member countries, and that's alcoholic drinks, cigarettes and tobacco, and automobiles. Although I have an asterisk there because in Indonesia, of course, you capture automobiles in the luxury sales tax. And luxury sales tax is kind of an excise. It probably would meet the definition of excise in the OECD classification. But the way you look at luxury sales tax on automobiles, I see excise because you have concessions for low-cost green cars, etc. So there's a lot of policy work, a lot of consumption policy work going on in there. So if I was advising the BKF, I would say it's almost time now to bring automobiles and motorbikes across from the luxury sales tax and place that into the excise tax system. And I'll share some ideas about that a bit later on too. Now, the second category are excise goods which are taxed in most, so 5 or more of the 10 ASEAN countries. So motorcycles there, 9 countries, petroleum-based fuels, 7, non-alcoholic drinks, 7, and it was nearly 8. 2013, you did try to get an excise up there. Vietnam is going to a vote soon on soft drinks, so it's nearly going to move to the first category, I think. Air conditioners on 6, engine lubricants like oils and greases in 5 countries, yachts in 5 countries, and gambling, which is probably the most serious service to include in excise, because gambling does a lot of harm. And the third category there is in some ASEAN countries, but at least 3 of the 10 countries. And there we have batteries, golf, fireworks, nightclubs and karaoke services, telecommunication services, home electronic goods, and crystal glassware. So a real mix there. So what can I do with that? The next step to help you is perhaps apply some of the principles in Article 2 of the law on excise. Apply some of the principles in Mr. Nirwala's presentation. I think he had a slide there, how do we achieve this? And highlight there some possible starting points. So using Article 2 and using what is commonly subject to excise across the region, and so probably less controversial. Opportunities there are in petroleum fuel, non-alcoholic drinks, although I know you've tried, engine lubricants, and maybe gambling and lottery type services. And each of those will probably tick 2 or 3 or more of the controlled consumption criteria of Article 2. So that's excise in ASEAN today. I just want to go through what's happened in recent history, because that also might influence some of your thinking. So probably one of the biggest issues across the 10 countries is particularly with AFTA and ATIGA and the free trade in goods across the region. There's been a need for customs and excise departments to look at replacing revenue in their revenue targets. So I can't think of any country that signed a free trade agreement and the Ministry of Finance said, okay, no problem, your revenue target will be slashed, cut as well. So this was also a really important question for the CMLV ASEAN countries, Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos and Vietnam, because they had a very high reliance on customs duties. Cambodia, for example, was like 40 or 41% of total government revenue came from customs duty, and to slash that to zero was quite a challenge for them. And in fact, the response by organisations like the World Bank was to say, it's time to reform your excise tax systems. It's time now to look to see if you have a need to expand excise. And perhaps a starting point would be what are goods that had high customs tariffs, maybe they were considered a luxury or harmful, and make sure they are in your excise tariffs at the appropriate rate. So not only were you recovering money by extra excise, but of course excise applies equally to domestic goods and imported goods. So you broadened the revenue capture from only imports to imports and domestic goods. Now, some countries still have excises set on the percentage of value, and excisable value was CIF plus any customs duty. So when customs tariffs went to zero, the actual excise that was being collected also was cut, because excisable value one day was based on CIF plus customs duty, and the next day was CIF plus nothing. so excise fell by itself. So you'll see on the next slide, there's a reaction to that is to make sure you move excise away from the percentage or the ad valorem approach and move excise to the specific or per litre per kilogram type approach, where the value does no longer matters, and the excise is actually probably better reflecting the harm of the goods. I didn't see anywhere where the government decided to increase the VAT to offset it was all put in the excise basket to fix. Now, one area that did arise sadly in my studies was that excise began to be structured in such a way that it was being used to replace customs tariffs as a trade barrier. So we call those non-tariff barriers, and after ATIGA, the local ASEAN Free Trade Agreement calls for all countries to remove all non-tariff barriers, as does GATT and the WTO. However, those things, I guess, agreements were ignored, and many countries used excise now to protect domestic industry. And I'll just, rather than give examples, because every country has easy to find examples, I'll just give the example here from Indonesia. So if you look, this is alcoholic beverages. If you look at category B, which would be wine, and category C, which would be ethyl alcohol like whiskey and vodka and rum, brandy, you'll see that there is two rates in the excise law. One rate for domestically produced alcohol beverages, and another rate, and a higher rate for the same imported beverage. So that actually puts a heavier tax burden on the imported product. And that was, of course, in the old days, that was the job of the customs tariff, not the excise, but today I see countries using the excise tariff to do that. Now, the problem is, and I've got down there a reference, the EU now has, you've come onto the radar of the European Union, which is not good. They have officially flagged this as trade barrier number 13722 in 2018. And they will start to put pressure on, because the Europeans like to sell wine. As you know, French wine is very famous. The whiskies from Scotland are very famous. They will start to put pressure on you to fix this. And in a minute, I'm going to go to the Philippines, and I'm going to tell you the risk in having excise-based non-tariff barriers. So that's some of the issues I've seen around customs being replaced with excise agreements are signed. Now, in a positive, a lot of luxury goods are coming out of excise tariffs. Luxury goods don't fit any of the Pigouvian or the Ramsey rules, and are just not sustainable. So it's good to see those coming out. And in fact, I believe your luxury sales tax has had several reforms where certain goods have come here as well. But we are seeing these luxury excises being replaced by excises on goods with harm. And some examples here, soda drinks in the last few years, Brunei, Malaysia and the Philippines have added soda, sweet soda, and Thailand has expanded the range. So Thailand only had excise on soda. It's now expanded it out to fruit juices and other drinks with sugar. E-cigarette liquid, Indonesia leads the way there. Congratulations. That's, I think you'll find other countries. I've already had questions from other countries about this. So you will be a leader in ASEAN and in fact, probably Asia Pacific on taxing e-cigarette liquid. Vehicle emissions, Thailand and Vietnam have moved to directly excising cars against how much emissions of CO2 that they have. And other eco-environmental, Brunei has put excise on plastic goods and rubber goods. I'm really excited about Commission 11 giving you the go-ahead on plastic packaging. You will be an ASEAN leader in that, and so I'll be watching very closely so I can keep my keep my academic standing up to date and my lectures up to date, and we'll come back to plastic in a minute, I hope. There are regular increases in alcohol and tobacco. They're the two favourite products to increase rates regularly upon, and it's probably also important to do that, because if you don't increase the excise rates on alcohol and tobacco, they will actually fall in real terms. So I'm seeing very positive signs of keeping alcohol and tobacco rates up in line with inflation, and seeing the move from value-based excises to specific rate or per kilogram and per litre excise rate basis. And once you do move excise from percentage to per litre per kilogram, you usually find an increase in revenue as well. I'm seeing a lot of simplification, which is great. There certainly was it still is a very complicated system of excising cigarettes in Indonesia, but it's a lot better than, a lot simpler than it was when I first was introduced. Similarly, Myanmar has done the same with alcohol and cigarettes, Philippines as well, and Thailand has simplified excise on all goods. They've done a very big job, which I'll talk to in a minute. And also, another interesting concept is the use of road maps. So actually in the excise law itself, and 5 years is usually the average, but what they do is the law actually sets out what the rates will be over the next 5 years. And it lets everyone plan. It lets industry plan, consumers plan. It lets the excise department forecast revenue properly, but it gives certainty over a 5-year period. So I'm seeing a lot more of that. But no surprises. Okay, so staying in ASEAN, I'd like to share with you probably some case studies of how big policy reforms were able to be put into place. Hopefully we can pick up some ideas here. First, one thing I've noticed is the best results have come from the major projects. So small one-off projects seem to, I guess, get stalled or stopped or compromised. The biggest positive reforms have come through in these big projects. So Thailand, and when I say major reform, it's like the whole Excise Act or the whole indirect tax system is picked up. And because of such a major project, they go for years. So when you decide you're going to reshape, maybe add some goods to the excise system, I have to warn you that it's not going to perhaps happen next month. You would be lucky. It might happen this time next year, but more likely it's going to be 3 or 4 years of really hard work to get up and running. So Thailand's big project, I call it codification. And what that means is, well, Thailand had excise covered over 7 different laws. They had 7 laws on excise. And they decided that they would bring them all together and then use the opportunity to make some major changes when the brand new one single law on excise came out. And so it was broken into many sub-projects. So, and I'll just explain some of them. Some of them, there's 4 there, I should say. There's some excise goods are still subject to excise on their value. And rather than using the factory price or the CIF, they used retail price. And they did that because, as I said earlier, with the replacement of customs duty with excise, those value-based excises were based on CIF plus customs. So excise was falling. So they moved the taxing point away from ex-factory and CIF up to retail price, which increased the value for excise. Automobiles were moved to excise system based on CO2 emissions. I've got some slides on that. And as I said, soft drink excise was expanded to new drinks and has become based on the sugar content now. Not so much based on the retail price, but based on the sugar content. And they removed a very complex alcohol tax structure that had been threatened by the EU to be taken to the WTO. So rather than fight the EU at the WTO, Thailand decided, hey, we'll remove our non-tariff barriers in alcohol and have a very simplified structure. Now that, as I said, it's a three-year hard work process. And so the Thais set up a policy development framework, I must say. So over on the right-hand side of your screen is the government side. The Thai Excise Department is a little bit different to you in Indonesia. It's a standalone department with its own DG, and it's actually bigger and more powerful than the Customs Department because it raises a lot more money now. And so the Excise Department took leadership of the project. And the first thing they did is they found all of the relevant government agencies that would be needed to work with. And they set up intergovernment committees, which met every 2 or 3 months to discuss issues around taxing the particular industry that the agency looked after. And of course, the Fiscal Policy Office was there as macroeconomic advisors. Also could do things like economic modelling and forecasting and so on. They also engaged academia. Local Thammasat University was selected. And then they thought that they would bring in some international ideas. So sharing of experiences like this from overseas. And being based in Thailand, they selected us at CCES, and we were very happy to help the Thai Excise Department and local academia and other agencies. On the left-hand side, there was a real engagement with industry from day one. So through the industry associations mostly, but sometimes individual businesses. Some of those businesses in Thailand are very big and very powerful. So a series of discussion papers and seminars were held, regularly. And quite often CCS was asked to make presentations at that seminar of how goods were taxed in different countries overseas. So the industry was able to have input regularly to the intergovernment committees, to the Excise Department itself. And it went round and round with talking, and finally agreement began to get ticked off, more agreement ticked off, more agreement ticked off, until a final policy could be put forward to the Cabinet, and the Cabinet signed off and it became excise law. So a very comprehensive policy development framework was set up with all the stakeholders identified. Look, in terms of success, the CO2 emissions has been pretty successful from day one. On there is the new rates. for excise on cars, and you can see the higher the emissions, basically the higher the excise rate is. That's a percentage of retail price there that you're looking at. I have the arrow across to the results, and you can see the main players in the Thai auto market, Toyota, Mazda, Nissan, big changes in eco cars. So the tax system actually incentivized or gave incentive to stop building big, dirty, emitting cars and start building smaller, cleaner burning cars. And see someone like Toyota with a 55% increase in eco cars can have no other effect than a positive effect on the environment. And so they follow that also too with motorcycles. Again, the higher the emissions, the higher the excise rate for motorcycles. Sugar drinks. It was a policy to expand from just sweet sodas to all beverages based on sugar content. And so they had ranges there of 0 to 6 grams, which would be free. There would be 6 to 8 grams per 100 mils, 8 to 10, 10 to 14, and 14 plus and 18 plus. It's dividing the beverage market into different sweetnesses rather than different products. And then they had a 5-year roadmap to get to the final excise tax system with incentives to reduce sugar quickly. So the higher the concentration of sugar, the faster your excise went to the top rate, and the lower the lower the sugar content, the slower your excise got to the desired rate. And it's probably too early on the roadmap to have results yet, but I did a meeting in Thailand in February, and the Department of Health and the Dentistry Department were starting to talk about positive figures already. So that's good news. Philippines. So I'm going to talk to the Philippines in 2 parts. The first part was as a result, a big reform as a result of a loss at the World Trade Organization. So the Europeans again said, we can't sell our whiskey and wine into the Philippines because you've used excise to block us out. And they won, and the Philippines lost. And so the option was that within 12 months, they restructure alcohol and tobacco to make it fair for importers. And if they didn't, the WTO was going to allow the Europeans and anyone else to put 100% tariffs on all Philippines' main exports. So it would have actually killed them to not do as they're told. So the Philippine government asked the World Bank, and the World Bank asked me, which was nice, to come and help restructure alcohol and tobacco. Now, a lot of politics and compromise goes on in policy development, and that's what I learnt in the Philippines. Now, like you've done with tobacco in Indonesia, one way to sell increased excise rates on tobacco on domestic producers was to identify all the extra excise that was raised and send that directly or earmark that directly for universal health coverage and to support any tobacco farmers that lost their farms due to reduced demand for local leaf. And it was great. I think at the end of the first year, 44 million people got to see a doctor for free, which was fantastic. And interestingly, no tobacco farmers lost any money because we got the alcohol and tobacco taxes balanced just right, we think. The extra excise that was to come was to be split 70% tobacco, 30% from alcohol, and we're allowed to have a 4-year phase in of the new policies that we developed. And I'm going to come back in a minute to economic modelling because that was a big help. The second part was, after such a successful reform of alcohol and tobacco, the Philippines government said, well, why don't we use all these new tools we've just learnt, all this new expertise, and let's try and reform other parts of our tax system. And the rest of the excise goods were included in that. But the main one I want to bring your attention to is a brand new excise they introduced on sugar sweetened drinks. So in the end, they decided to have two rates. One was 6 pesos per litre if the drinks used artificial sweeteners and ordinary sugar. And then double that, 12 pesos per litre if they use high fructose corn syrup, which is like a high intense sweet sweetener that goes into products like soda. And then they did, for clarity, exempt a few products like milk and water so that people, drinking necessities weren't caught up in the new excise. I want to come back to the Philippines. I just want to also share with you Malaysia and its new excise on soft drinks and sodas. That only came into force in July last year. But again, I want to share with you, it was a 5-year process. But importantly, the process started in the Ministry of Health, not the Bureau of Internal Revenue. So this was seen as a health measure, not a revenue measure. So it had a lot more political support because the government was trying to keep the health of Malaysians steady. So when it was agreed that sweetened sodas and sweetened drinks were a problem, they produced a national action plan. And the National Action Plan included a new excise tax on sugar-sweetened beverages. And then they handed over the design and delivery of the new excise to the Ministry of Finance. Okay, so this measure came from health. They did all the study, all the research, got all the numbers together, all the arguments, destroyed all the industry arguments, and then it was handed over to the Ministry of Finance as a please put this in place for us. So interesting way. So sometimes the point I'm trying to make is some of these new goods, they might have to start in health, or start with the environment, or start with industry, and then come over to you to finish off. Just back to the Philippines, we also set up a policy development framework there. I must say, industry was left out of the discussions, and they were left out of discussions because they were lobbying the congressman directly. Industry didn't want to talk to the Department of Finance, didn't want to talk to Customs, didn't want to talk to the World Bank. It only wanted to lobby their local congressmen. So they weren't really engaged. We engaged industry through Congress. But again, working groups with the relevant agencies, they were identified and set up. And the Department of Finance said, this is all too much for us, so we will engage the World Bank. The World Bank brought in 2 teams, an econometrics team and a public health team, and experts in each. And then World Bank kindly asked CCES to come and support both those teams, which I did, and I spent quite a bit of 2012 and 13 in Manila. And what I want to share with you now is a very powerful set of tools that were produced during that process, because in a lot of policy development settings, you will have pushback and you'll have arguments from politicians who are representing their stakeholders. You'll have a lot of pushback from industry, and some of those industry people will have a lot of influence with politicians or have an influence with other government agencies. And so you really have to have your arguments put together with a lot of evidence really well and really early, and be prepared to argue on that evidence. So in any excise policy development, I think there's a few things you need to prepare in the first stages. So you have to very clearly identify what product categories, what products you want to place the excise on. So we have to start with some very clear definitions. So if you're talking non-alcoholic beverages, are you talking just 1 or 2 categories like soda? Are Are you talking several categories that have sugar? So soda, juices, ready to drinks, iced coffee. Or are you talking about every beverage that has sugar? So we've got to put those parameters. And I come back to plastics. Are you just taxing plastic bags? Are you just taxing plastic products, plastic packaging? You can tax all of them, but we have to be very clear what you want to tax and then have a very clear definition of what that is. And then when you have that, then you go and start to understand, you go and research the market. So what are the volumes of these different products that are sold into the market each year? And preferably, well, I think you'd need at least 6 to 10 years of historical research on those volumes of those products. And then when you have that, there's expertise around the place. We have that here at Sturt University. The World Bank have it as well. But when you have that sort of data, you can start to measure things like the price sensitivity. So when the price of a product changes, we can start to understand how consumers will respond to that price change. And that's very important. Will they stop buying? Will they slow down? And how much will they slow down their consumption? And importantly, will they substitute to another product? So if you have a tax on soda but not on fruit juice, will people just switch from a sugar sweetened soda to a sugar sweetened fruit juice? And then you have zero tax and zero reduction in sugar. So we must understand the relationship between the different products in the different categories. So where goods are price sensitive, when they're not price sensitive, that's good for revenue. When they are price sensitive, it's good for reducing harm, as long as you have all the substitutes captured in the new policy. Philippines and in Thailand, we build what we call economic models. So once we have that data, once we have that sort of information, we can start to build models and we can start to forecast what will happen when you introduce a new policy. This model, just the outline here, and I'm going to show you it in real life in a minute, some data from it. But what you do is you put in your new tax scenario, and then the data is run, and what happens is the products that are in your product categories start to change their prices. Okay, as excise goes on, prices sort of go up, and then when the prices go up, we then go down and we see, well, what happens when the prices go up? How do the consumers respond? So how much do they decrease consumption? How much substitution goes on between the different products? And then we have the different quantities. We see how much the market changes. And when we have the new volumes of sales in the market after the tax change, we can then calculate what revenue would be collected in our new tax policy. So in a model like this, we can say, okay, with your excise tax policy on these new goods, or increasing the excise on current goods, we can tell you how much consumption will change and whether that's good or bad. We can tell you how much revenue extra you will collect or not collect. So the best way perhaps is to actually show you an example. So here is just a one-off snapshot of the model that built for Thailand soft drinks. So on the left there are the categories. I think there's 7 categories of non-alcoholic beverage in Thailand, according to the market. And you'll see there, before we did the modelling, before the policy changed, only carbonates and functional drinks paid excise, and they paid excise at the rate of 20%. And if you look over there at scenario 3, there was just an attempt there by the modeler to reduce the excise rate from 20 to 16, but apply it to all the beverages except bottled water. So we say, what happens in that policy? And we can see across different categories that here is the change in consumption. So as you imagine, the soda goes up because the rate has fallen from 20% to 16%. And then there's the different categories falling or rising as a result of the tax. Those categories there that are falling, that's because they're paying tax for the first time. But overall, there's still an increase in consumption of 108 million litres. Now, what's that mean for revenue? Well, in this case, it was fairly revenue neutral, only 31 million baht extra. And of course, the losses from excise were seen in the products that had tax at 20% and fell to 16. And the increases in revenue came from products being taxed for the first time. Okay. So you can see, if you can set up, build models like this, you start to be able to, when you're questioned by Commission 11, when you're questioned by journalists, you can now start to say, well, this policy is a good policy. This excise policy will reduce consumption of this harmful product and will encourage the consumption of this less harmful product and will raise us a certain amount of revenue. And they say, well, how do you know that, sir? How do you know that? Well, we've done economic modelling based on 10 years of data from the market. So we stand by that. And it makes your arguments to Commission 11 very, very strong. Now, these are not easy to build. So my last slide here is how can you go about utilising some of these tools and skills? Well, organisations like the World Bank, ADB, IMF usually have teams that can have these skills or have the capacity to buy in or contract. And they're all very available to ministries of finance. I believe the World Bank has an office in Jakarta, and I think it may have reached out to the Ministry of Finance several times on tobacco reforms. So academia, the model you saw was built by us at CCES. We don't have anyone on the team, but next door we have the School of Accounting and Finance, and they do have econometricians who can measure price sensitivity, who can measure substitution, who can build models. And so I would imagine that there is the same level of expertise locally in Indonesia. It's just I haven't come across that yet. But probably more importantly, as these are excise goods, as these have a connection with harm, you need to have a relationship with the relevant agency, be that Department of Health or Department of Environment, to either work with you on introducing the idea or pick up their idea and run with it yourself, but certainly 100% have them 100% behind you in the when you argue your case at Commission 11 to get the new tax up. So there are resources out there, and certainly so people like myself are email or a phone call away to help direct you to the right person if need be. So I think I've hit my 45 minutes. So what I'll do is I'll hand that back to you, Yudhi, and thank everyone for their patience and their time this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. You are very punctual. That's exactly the time. If we all find that presentation insightful and inspiring indeed. Now, allow me to summarize. In his presentation, Professor Preece covers 4 key issues. First, he talked about the principles of excise, and then he related them to excise policy in Indonesia. Here, Professor Preece revealed his deep understanding of the excise law in Indonesia. Next, he presented excise policy in ASEAN countries. He also mentioned what lesson Indonesia can learn from their experiences. I note here one important phrase, understanding the market. I think is very important for us to understanding the market before we impose excise. Next, he went over trends in ASEAN excise policies. He mentioned that ASEAN countries has replaced their lost custom duties with excise. He also discussed how excise is used in addressing harmful consumption. He also provided examples how to simplify excise policy and use roadmaps. Lastly, he talked about policy development in Indonesia, how to expand the excise base. He mentioned several problems with Indonesia might find how other countries overcame these problems. The same with Pak Sandri, we have a big problem here with our parliament. So before we come to the parliament, I think we need to be really prepared. He also suggested that Directorate General of Excise use external assistance. He mentioned about international agency like World Bank and also universities before proposing new accessible goods, and also for excise for certain. Honorable guests and audience, our last speaker is none other than Pak Permana Agung D. All modern organizations must have legendary figures, and Pak Permana Agung is indeed the legend for the Directorate General of Customs and Excise. Please allow me to lead you through his CV. Pak Permana Agung was born in Catanegara, Lombok on the 27th of October 1952. His educational background is very impressive. He earned his PhD and master degree from the University of Notre Dame. He also earned a master degree from University of Illinois. Pak Permana Agung earned his bachelor and graduate diploma from State Finance Institute, what we know today as the Stan Polytechnic State of Finance. For me personally, Pak Permana Agung is my idol. He inspired me to pursue my PhD. Wow, I feel the chill in my spine. Pak Permana Agung has history serving as a custom officer. His last position was as the Director General from 1999 to 2002. Afterward, he held many positions in the Ministry of Finance. His last position was as the head of Financial Education and Training Agency. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Pak Permana Agung. Please unmute Pak Agung.
Okay. Pak Yudhi, Tulis, Nabila yang saya hormati. Pertama tentu yang mewakili Pak Direktur Jenderal, the Director of Excise, and then the Honorable Professor Preece, yeah. Pak Sandri, of course, yeah. First of all, I would like to mention very explicitly that it's my honor to be appointed as the speaker. Yeah. And allow me also to congratulate, to appreciate the excellent presentation by Professor Preece. I don't agree with the Excise 101 as he just mentioned. Actually, it was Excise 505, I guess. And Sandri, of course. Yeah. Professor Preece, I believe, has given a tremendous support to Indonesian Customs and Excise Department in your effort to extend the applicability of the excise. Yeah. At least he gave the flavor about the accessibility of the product in Asia. Here, I would like to share more of the potential challenge. When I speak about challenge, I do not mean the obstacles, the hindrance. It is truly a challenge to make you more prepare, especially in facing the people of from the Commission 11, from business industries, people, etc. So more of the potential challenge that has to do with your efforts, yeah, and that, of course, I believe relevant to the Indonesian phenomena. Professor Preece has mentioned very explicitly about the equity, externality, Pigovian tax, where the price of the good does not reflect the full cost of its consumption. He also elaborated about price inelastic from Professor Ramsey. Okay. Right now, I would like to choose those topics, mainly about the Ramsey rule, about the inelasticity, the Pigovian tax, about the externality, plus one more thing that is a new institutional economics that was inspired by Douglas North, the one who won the Nobel Prize in 1993, and then wrote very well-known books, Why Nations Fail. So I will like to get the insight from that and then share with you in order to make sure you have the preparation more basic to face all the industry and the business people that sometimes has a very powerful man. Okay, first, why I think Ramsey rule is important. Yeah. And this is one of the reasons why extensification of excise is also justified. When we are talking about Ramsey rule for inelastic product, the government could impose a relatively high excise rates without being a source of market distortion, without creating inefficient allocation of resources. That's why we prefer excise. However, even the quantity demanded for that inelastic product remain quote unquote stable in response to price change, i.e. revenue sufficient is secure from excise revenue target, but consumer at the same time will reduce their consumption of other goods. Why? As a result of a lower their relative income. Therefore, from my perspective, there is a fiscal implication as consumption of other goods. We are talking about substitution effect here. As the consumption of other goods decreasing, the tax revenue from that other goods also decrease. That is a revenue forgone. So you have to be careful when we put ourselves in one holistic set. We have partners from the people department, Directorate General of Taxation. So make sure there is a shifting of revenue. Yeah. And now there is the potential for the challenge here. Ramsey rules, Professor Ramsey rule assumed the product tax, the consumption tax, i.e. the excise, is independent of the factor of production. They assume. In other words, excise or product tax or consumption tax, they assume only impact consumers, not producers. Okay? And remember, as consumption of other goods decreasing while maintaining consumption of inelastic product whose price increase keeps stable, right? It also we can see its demand of other goods decreasing, price of other goods decreasing. Then the firms try to cut costs. To reduce the wages, the price of factor of production is reducing, and therefore there has to be a change in supply and demand curves. So there is an interaction between the product tax and the factor of production tax. Then we have to be careful. Still another challenge. We know exactly about what we call as labor displacing effects due to technological advancement right now, right? We're trying to make the production process as far as possible using high-tech machine. But now the question is, because we have also the duty to create and maintain employment creation. So there is an interplay here. We have to be very careful. In other words, what I'm trying to make the point is here is that a product tax, a consumption tax, or excise may act indirectly as a factor tax in other industries, and therefore they have a revenue consideration, employment impacts, right? So we have to be take that into consideration, make sure everything in place so that by the time we have to discuss with the Department of Health, Department of Environment, the people from Commission 11, we already prepare about all the whole thing, the holistic approach about our intention to extensify the excise. The second one is about the PIGO, negative externality. Professor Reece mentioned very explicitly, right? With the presence of externality, price of the good does not reflect the full cost of its consumption. In other words, the market failed to register the full cost. Yeah, to a certain extent, create problem for market mechanism to a certain extent. What I'm trying to say here is that when externality present, the actual supply curve include the external costs used to overstate the opportunity cost of producing the goods. So at the actual output level exceed the desired amount. So really be careful. That's why this Pigouvian tax or this excise type generated by PIGO is designed to correct those presence of negative externality or to correct their associate market failure. But unfortunately, this comes the challenge. The efficiency of this Pigouvian framework requires perfectly competitive market. In our phenomena in Indonesia, we have to go quite a long way and winding, as Sandri mentioned. So imperfect competition will generate market distortion. Monopolies, oligopolies, government intervention, political intervention, market power playing, deal making, etc. The result, sometime under production, some firms try to make the product artificially scarce so that they can increase the price, and at the same time the employment will drop and there will be a revenue forgone. So this one also have to be taken care of, right? Thus, in these circumstances, government intervention via excise in trying to rectify the externality through changes in rate, through changes in the price, have to be really considered very carefully. Okay? That's the challenge that we have to take care. And then the the other one, the plus one that I would like to mention, because we do not want to see whatever the policy design is in place, then when come to the implementation, there will be a problem. I always tell everybody, in public policy, there is always 3 steps: policy design, and then legal drafting and implementation. The policy design, how we design the policy with all the knowledge, the skill, the background we have. And then the second phase, how that design is transferred into legal drafting so that everybody will be forced to obey that rules. That's the second phase of public policy. And then the third one, implementation. Now, we do not want to see the implementation has some problem. So that's why I feel very important to put the third element that I would like to share with you is the new institutional economics. So this is the further challenge. As I mentioned before, in 1993, Douglas North won the Nobel Prize. Douglas North is professor of Berkeley, California. He has triple major, economic, political science, and philosophy. Then with Darren H. Maglu, economist from MIT, and James Robinson, political scientist from University of Chicago, wrote a well-known book, as I mentioned before, Why Nations Fail. Of course, all of us do not want to see in designing a policy design, then at the end of the day, our nation fail. We do not want that. That's why we have to take care of this insight. He explicitly asserted that economists have to focus on possessing good institution. Good institution. For that, Douglas North created a new way of thinking. Professor Preece mentioned several times about level of thinking. Yeah, North created a new way of thinking about economics, which put human behavior, human habit, human attitude, and character at the core. You know why some nations in this world lag behind, fail? Because lack of good institution, right? They keep on experiencing long run stagnation. They're experiencing absolute decline in economic well-being. They overwhelmingly favor activities that promote redistributive rather than productive activities. They create monopolies rather than competitive conditions. They restrict opportunities rather than expanding them. So why it is important in economic development? Because in economic development, there is a path dependence. Institutions perpetuate themselves. This have to be very careful. Good organization lead to persistently good institution. And vice versa, bad organization lead to persistently bad organization. And at the end of the day, those will reinforce economic growth. Because I believe our design of tax policy, including excise, the ultimate objectives to make sure is our economy will be growth. And excise, never forget, excise is not only as an instrument to collect funds or revenue, but excise also tools for social and economic development. Okay, then this is Pak Sandri also asked me to to mention several things about a question. When we introduce excise, does it really happen? There will be a reduction in consumption. This have to be, as mentioned by Professor Preece, we have to conduct the econometrics models, right? Especially observing the price effect, which can be divided into income effects and substitution effect. Okay? So income as effect, I do not want to jot down very explicitly about the economic and graphics model here, but substitution effect encourages more consumption of the good which has become relatively cheaper. That's why Professor Preece mentioned a couple times, if that happened, then the revenue from excise will be zero, because some people substitute that. That's why he mentioned also very explicitly, be careful when we choose a certain potential candidate for the good subject to excise. Make sure there is no substitution or minimal substitution, so that we can make sure that the revenue will be secure. At the same time, we have to also consider the multiplier effects, quote unquote. In fiscal policy, the multiplier effects, this is rule of thumb, usually takes about 6 months to get the economy rolling as we desired, so that the revenue generated will give the maximum. 6 months, only half of the multiplier effects. So that's why when you you ask a question, when we introduce an excise, does that really reducing the consumption? Not only income and substitution effect has the interplay here, but also the multiplier effects we have to consider. Thus there is a time lag we have to consider there. And then the revenue performance. I'm happy to see, we are all happy to see that the excise is one of the source of revenue that still demonstrated an increase, about 8.8% within this pandemic condition. So then there is a pressure to our thinking, why don't we extensify the goods subject to excise as a contributing revenue for our APBN. But nevertheless, do not ever forget, excise role is not only limited to generate a revenue. They have another important role as a social and economic development tools. This is the one that have to be utilized fully, not only the revenue generated. So I agree, in this situation where the aggregate demand is lowering, so we have to find another tax design, i.e. the excise, try to contribute more positively to revenue. But do not stop there, because excise have the potential to be used as social and economic tools. Remember the philosophy of excise, right? Even to maintain employment creation, we can use excise. To internalize externality, we can use excise. To make the use of resources more efficient using input-output model, also can use excise, etc. So those are the consideration that we have to, you have to think very deeply about this challenge when we are trying to make the extensification of the excise good. So not only because the excise assessment method is better understood, excise is regarded more fairer, no complicated form to fill in, no temptation or opportunity to make a false return, audit is still unnecessary. That's also in prefer. That also make our preference toward excise. But there is also economic consideration that we have to take care. So that at the end of the day, we have a very holistic understanding about the nature of the tax, the nature of the excise. So that by that time, we can really prepare to face our partners from Department of Health, Department of Environmental, even the people from Commission 11. Pak Yudhi, I guess those are the points that I would like to share. I don't want to take so much time because Professor Preece already mentioned lots of detailed things about excise. I really congratulate and appreciate the presentation by Professor Preece and also Pak Sandri. The presentation is quite interesting with the piano playing, etc. Give some people inspiration, of course, and I do hope the people from the excise department in particular will keep learning what has been said by Professor Preece. Pak Yudhi, I give it back to you.
Permana Agung, wow. As usual, I need time to digest the lecture from Pak Permana Agung. But let me summarize. Pak Permana Agung exposed us to the potential challenge that we face. He encourages us to be more prepared in proposing new accessible goods. For that, we need to understand here excise. Be firm about the basics of excise. He mentioned about PIGO, where market failure to express the actual cost. He also mentioned about Ramsey rule, where extensification of excise is justified. Lastly, Pak Permana Agung institutional economics. Here he mentioned about 3 steps in public policy: legal design, legal drafting, and also the important thing when creating, designing policy, that we should put human at the core. And we need to understand that when we impose excise, we affect the entire economic system. So, my distinguished guests and audience, the presentation delivered by Pak Permana Agung marks the end of our presentation session. Unquestionably, you surely have questions to ask to our speakers. Let us instigate our Q&A session by inviting 3 audiences first. I have here Pak Adrian Hermawan, also Pak Yazid Harsa, and Pak Sutartip. Are you with me? Ask your question directly. Okay, Pak Adrian Hermawan is here. Pak Hermawan.
Yes, thank you for having this opportunity. Excuse me, mohon izin Pak Yudhi dan Pak Permana Agung yang saya hormati. I salute to all the moderator and all the explanation for this. Thank you for the explanation, Pak Permana Agung and Pak Yudhi. I would like to ask a question about, can excise be applied to services? As we know that in Indonesia, we only applied excise only on goods to control goods that have negative externalities to society. But we also know that there is services that have negative externalities, such as prostitution, that exists in Indonesia. And we know that from the slide from Dr. Rob Pearce, Dr. Rob Preece from the slide 7, that in other Asian countries that excise is levied or applied in gambling, lottery, nightclub, or karaoke. I just want to know if it also can be applied in Indonesia for services that have negative externalities. Because I'm so upset or anguished from industry that taking advantage or taking revenue from us, but it's tax free. Thank you for thank you for having this opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, our next question will come from Pak Yazid Harson. Are you with us today? Pak Yazid, do you want to ask your question directly?
Do we need to answer the first question, or should we answer the first question, or are we keeping them all for the end?
Okay, you can answer the question first.
Oh,
Maybe
okay.
we can go to the second question later.
Okay. Do you want me to go first? It was because I think I.
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Well, yes. There are many countries that apply excise on services, and the common ones we have listed in that slide in slide number 7. In my experience, though, they are difficult to administer, and they're also very easy to hide. And a lot of these services are sometimes online, so they are operating in a different country, and you might not have the tax laws to actually be able to police that. And when I look at Article 2, I'm not sure if there's a legal basis to extend Indonesian Excise 2 services, because Article 2 talks about goods of a certain character. So, the answer is it's possible. It's very difficult to administer, and I'm not sure that it would be allowed in Indonesia at this stage. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yes. Pak Yudhi, can I add just a little bit?
Yes, Pak Permana Agung.
Okay, I agree with Professor Preece. In fact, in our law, even though there is no explicitly mention about services, but the criteria that we put in one of our articles there mentioned that we can use excise as a fiscal tool to control consumption, right? Now, consumption here can be interpreted as the one that unhealthy, and the other one is the one that immoral. So when Pak Adrian mentioned about prostitution is considered, we can control that thing that is immoral. So probably one of the advantages of the excise in Indonesia is that we can rectify, we can add another new excisable goods every year, because we have Undang-Undang APBN, right? So it's quite different maybe from other countries that have to rectify the whole set of regulation. Our excise law contains only the principles, but every year when we want to add a new product as accessible goods, we can do that yearly by just adding, right? Because one of the characteristic of excise is that the one that want to have to be included in the accessible commodity have to be mentioned explicitly in the law. So with the law, we mean as the Undang-Undang APBN. So every year we can rectify, we can adjust our law to accommodate the new product that is going to be subjected to excise. Gitu Pak Yudhi, thank you.
Thank you, Pak Permana Agung. Next question will come from Yazid. You here? Pak Yazid?
Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay. Please, Pak Yazid.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity. I have a simple question to Permana Agung. It's about Undang-Undang 7, 1995. They say that the additions of new goods to be accessible will be set by government rules, peraturan pemerintah. In revisions, law number 39 changed into that it should be approved by the parliament. And I don't know whether there is discussion before that, but while we changed that that rule, we keep discussing about extensifications of excise. And I think that change hinder us from doing what we always discuss year to year. Can you explain what is the story behind that change? Thank you, sir.
You can answer that directly, Pak Permana Agung.
Okay, Pak Yudhi, Pak Yazid, thank you for the question. I do not, actually, I do not get the complete set of the question because some technological problems, but I try to understand the question. The law number 39 mentioned, when we designed the law number 39, we already inserted an article that gave the room for the law anytime, any year to expand, to add the new accessible commodity, right? This is quite different with sales tax, income tax, personal income tax, corporate income tax, which have to be, have to change the whole set of the rules. But excise, because this is Undang-Undang APBN every year. So in law number 39, we just mentioned about the principle, the criteria, which criteria have to be applied for the potential commodity to be excised. That's law number 39. Then every year, it is ideal for the Customs Department and Excise Department, the Ministry of Finance, beforehand, before come to the Commission 11, to make some discussion with the department, technical department, right? Department of Health, Department of Environment, for etc., so that we gain some common ground. Why this commodity have to be taxed, have to be subjected to excise. Once we get that common ground, we take that to the people of Commission 11. So I don't think, from my experience, maybe right now already changed the law, peraturan pemerintah, PP is needed for actually to coordinate across department, but then that's decided by the president, right? But this one, we are talking about law. So law number 39 and law APBN every year. because one of the characteristic of the excise is that it has to be mentioned, it has to be enumerated individually in the law. Enumerated individually in the law, we have Undang-Undang APBN, and law number 39 only provide the criteria so that the government, the Commission 11 can have the basis for adding a new excisable commodity. Gitu Pak Yudhi.
Our next question comes from Pak Sutartip. He problem with his internet, so I'll read his question. Pak Sutartip, what's the opinion from Pak Permana Agung and Professor Preece about our new accessible goods, the plastic packaging? As we know that other countries already imposed the same excise on plastic packaging, like the Netherlands and Estonia. In the Netherlands, they set a threshold of 50 tons. Below that threshold, excise is exempted from plastic packaging. So please, Pak Permana Agung and Professor Preece, give your opinion about this.
Professor Preece, I'm going after you.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the question. If my research this morning is correct, the latest position is that there'll be an excise on plastic bags of a thickness greater than 75 microns, and that'll be 30,000 rupiah per kilogram, if I'm correct. So in any bag under a thickness of 75 microns will fall outside of the excise law. As I said in my presentation, you'll actually be the first country in ASEAN to implement this plastic bag excise. There are, as you mentioned, some in Europe. They're also in place across Africa, but interestingly, the African excises are based on the value of the plastic bag and not the and sort of not related to the externally the weight or the number of bags. So look, so if that's your thinking, I think the excise design is going closer to the European excises on plastic bags, and that not every country has them yet, but that's the way you're headed. The excise is linked to the externality by being a rate per kilogram. I'm just wondering, are you covering? We talked about substitutes. Is there other areas of plastic that are of concern? We look at unfortunately we look at the pictures of your tourist destinations where the beaches, we have plastic straws and plastic bottles and and the like as well. But it looks like the initial focus will be plastic bags. So my comment is it's a step in the right direction. It's a product that is suitable for excise. It meets the criteria, and it looks like some thought has gone into the design of that. It's just perhaps a shame it's a little bit narrow in my regard. Over to you, Pak Permana.
Yes. Well, I'm going to echo the one that mentioned by Professor Preece. I also agree that plastic bag has to be one of the excisable commodity. Right? But the question is, why then certain government make a threshold? Exceed 50 ton, going to be excisable. Below 50 tons, tax excise exempted. Now that's, it's very interesting. Why they need a certain threshold to be exempted and to be subject to excise. Some other countries maybe have different threshold. Now, this threshold probably has to do with the intention of excise as fiscal tools try to make a more efficient use of resources. Just like sugar for the first time when it was introduced in Germany. Some people from Commission 11 asked me the question, why you levise on sugar? And whereas sugar is the one that needed by the whole population. That's the question. Then the answer is, referring to the Germany experience, because the government would like to make the use of resources as efficient as possible. For example, we have a certain acres of land. The government come in and said, if this land can produce 10 tons of sugar, then we can free them from excise, exempted them from excise. But if you use that resources inefficiently, for example, with that land, certain acres, you make a result, say about 5 tons, below 10 tons, then the government will put excise there. The lower the production level, the higher the excise. But once they pass the 10 tons, for example, then the government exempted the sugar from the excise. So there is an intention, not only revenue generator from the government, try to make sure the efficient use of resources is in place. So that is probably the explanation why the government, certain government, feel necessary to put the threshold above 50 tons, subject to excise, below 50 tons, exempted, etc., etc. I give it back to Pak Yudhi.
Thank you, Pak Permana Agung. Our next question will come from Luis Tobing. Are you with us, Luis?
Yes, sir. I'm here.
Go ahead then.
All right. Thank you for the time, Pak Yudhi. May some question. As we know, some of the accessible good is come from consumption. And I like to ask some question. Can we tax the accessible goods from the production? Like CO2 production is quite high in this moment, and some kind of country make some power plant from coal, from burning coal, and I think can we tax the accessible goods from the production, not only from consumption? Thank you.
Answer that, Pak Permana Agung and Professor Preece.
Okay.
Preece, would you like?
We'll do our tag team again, hey? It's a very good question, actually. The CO2 emission tax is very topical at the moment. What we call carbon pricing, and there's mechanisms in countries being developed, such as carbon tax, which is a tax which is per ton of CO2 emissions. And then there are emission trading schemes, cap and trade, so where you get an allocation of emissions, and you try and stay below that cap. And if you can't, you have to try and buy some credits, emission credits from those that have stayed below. And then the governments try and bring down the cap each year. So carbon taxing and emission trading generally falls outside of the excise tax systems at production. But carbon taxing, they say that the fuel excise was the first carbon tax ever drafted. because it relates to fuel burning in an engine and putting emissions into the air, and quite often fuel tax policies was designed to sort of capture higher or put higher rates upon higher emitting fuels and higher emitting vehicles. So so CO2 emissions are captured indirectly in the taxation of fuel and automobiles in the excise system. But yeah, carbon taxing and emission trading is very political. It's a highly charged topic and very hard for government to implement because it increases the cost across the economy to business and households when you do that. So Australia, we had a carbon tax. We tried to migrate to emission trading and we had to scrap it all because every government that supported it got voted out of office very, very quickly. So yeah, a great question. You're asking about carbon taxing and emissions trading outside of excise, I think, but excise can capture the second stage where emissions come out of products. Yeah. Okay, back to Permana.
Yes, Prof. Preece, Pak Tobing, thank you for the question. I think this question is very smart, at least from my perspective. Yeah. But I'm assure you that I'm not going to talk about the political observation about the carbon emission taxing. Now, the question is when I say about Ramsey rule, right? Excise basically is consumption tax, but at the same time, indirectly is a factor tax using the mechanism in the market. So at the end of the story, I can also mention that excise have some ramification in applying the excise to a certain commodity. They can combine directly using a factor of production or indirectly using the product. So the government can use excise as fiscal tools to make a burden more heavier on the machine and lower on the labor. In other words, the government can engineer the excise, because this is a social and economic tools, toward the combination directly, factor of production, or indirectly. Yeah. So that's the room given to what we call as an excise. So the question now is how the government official, the excise department, using those apparatus, those tools for economic and social development to achieve what we want for the sake of the growth of the government of the people. Thank you, Pak Yudhi.
Thank you, Pak Permana Agung. We have also a question from Ibu Halimatus Saadah from Custom Office Denpasar. Are you with us, Bu Halimatus Saadah? Okay, you can ask directly now.
Thank you for the chance, Mr. Yudhi. Your Excellency, Mr. Permana, all the speakers, seniors, and all staff. I'm sorry, all the audience. I'm from Ngurah Rai Custom. My name is Halimatus. This is a very, I like not follow the seminar, but I like the look like the student who in the college. So very amazing speakers. Thank you for all the speakers. And my question for the first for Mr. Preece, as we know that Indonesia has among the countries that apply a few excise objects. So I want to ask for your own personal view. Can we Indonesia to apply all of the entire excise tax like other countries? And also the second question for Mr. Sandri or maybe for Mr. Permana is all right. The second question, why we took a long time to execute the policy like plastic. It took so long time to implement the policy because besides we put aside the sectoral ego and also the different interests. Why? Because I'm here as the question not as a customs officer, but I ask here as a student who want to know more the knowledge about the excise. So why we took so long time to execute the policy, and how long we can implement all the excise taxes? Cause this is chance can we this is chance to increase the revenue, the collect to increase our GDP and target of state revenue. Maybe thank you, and I'm sorry for my bad English. Thank you, sir.
No, your English is good. We can understand you quite well. You can answer that,
Yeah,
Professor
yes,
Preece.
yeah. Yes, your English is fine. Stood very clearly, so congratulations. So I think the first question was to me. The answer is yes. Yes, I think you can apply excise to those other goods that I listed in, I think, slide 8. I can see no reason why legally they won't fit the characteristics or criteria to be excise objects. And your next questions to Pak Sandri and Pak Permana will be about the politics of why it takes so and why it's difficult. My answer is yes. All I add is that it's worth investing some time to get your excise policy correct, so that you can easily enforce the excise laws, administer the excise tax, and collect everything that is owed to you. Don't forget to, when you expand excise, you'll need to be issuing more licenses. There'll be more returns coming in, more reports to reconcile against revenue, more forecasting. So it will also increase your workload. And so I hope that that can be recognized in allocating resources to manage the extra goods. But there are so many goods there we mentioned that can legally fall into the law on excise. And I believe that the momentum has started, and the process of locking in new excise objects is not too far away. And if I can help you with making good policy, I will if I can. So thank you. I hand over the politics.
Okay, Ibu Sauda, thank you for the question. This question is really fall in the realm of politics. Why it took a long time? This is a political process. This is a public choice issue, right? Maybe Ibu Sauda will know sometime. There are things that complicate the effective use of fiscal policy. There are factors that complicate the effective use of fiscal policy. One of those things is the time lag. Yeah, when before a fiscal policy, before excise policy change is instituted, usually experts start to study the problems. DPR, the lawmakers hold hearing, legislators delay, get waivers from the constituents, lawmakers until the lawmaker convince, right? That take a long time. And then after fiscal policy, after the excise policy change instituted, then still we need some problem to make that become effective. So at the end of the day, it took quite a long time. This is political process, public choice issue. That's why I mentioned before, the people from Customs and Excise Department, when they're trying to propose a potential excisable goods, they have really to be careful. A lot of potential challenge on the way. They have to deal with industry people, with individuals that have a lot of powers, not to mention the people from the Commission 11. They need some time to make sure their constituents will stand behind him. So at the end of the day, they complicate the process, and at the end take so much time. Gitu Pak Yudhi.
Oh, Yudhi, can I just assure Pak Helmas that this is not
sure. Yes.
This is not unique to Indonesia. Okay, this is every country. In Thailand, you know, they made a joke to me once at the Ministry of Finance that after the military coup, it was just generals in charge. There was no experts in the government. And they called it they called it policy making heaven because they put an idea to the general in charge of the Ministry of Finance, and he said, "Don't worry, if anyone complains, have them arrested." so easy. In the Philippines, it was I called it the bear pit because it was just so it just got so nasty, the fighting. You know, for 1 week in the World Bank, we had to go to the Ministry of Finance in bulletproof cars because so many people were so angry that the price of cigarettes and alcohol would go up. So they made death threats to the team. But in the Congress debate, it's, you know, some senators had tobacco farms, some senators had breweries to make beer, other senators relied on donations from big industry leaders, and we just had to keep our evidence strong. We keep defending our evidence, stayed on the one path, and work our way through the arguments with just facts and data. And we got through. But it's not unique to Indonesia, don't worry.
Thank you, Professor Preece. Our next question, this is very important, I think, came from Pak Eddie, the Belgian Customs Counselor in Jakarta. Are you with us, Mr. Eddie? Okay, you can ask directly.
I think, yes, if you can hear me. Hello, everybody. I'm happy that I can attend this 12th CEEC Inspirational Talks. It has inspired me a lot, and I'm an experienced Belgian customs officer, but even on my old experienced age, I learned a lot of excises today. And maybe I want to answer a little bit to something mentioned by Professor Preece. He said if you do it all together with the Asian countries, it will be difficult. I can assure you it can work. We have in Europe, the European Union, a system of excises for the whole community, together with a system for each separate country. So, and it's very good working. For the rest, I also have been teaching and training people, and I always had a joke about excises that I said, the government agreed to put excises on cigarettes, alcohol, whatever, and the only aim of them is protecting your health. And everybody started to laugh, because it's not only protecting your health, it's also the governmental budget that has to be receiving a lot of taxes. And I think in almost most of the countries, the taxes are becoming or are more important than the protecting the society. So what I miss a little bit in Indonesia is that certainly on plastic. I had a little bit of holidays on the islands, and when you want to swim in the sea, you first have to clean the beach for 2 days to remove all the plastic. So I think Indonesia is very polluted, one of the biggest countries in the world polluted with plastic. So I wonder that even this is such a very difficult task to bring a kind of tax on plastic bottles and so on. In Belgium, we have taxes on packages, we have taxes on non-alcoholic beverages and whatever. So like I already proposed too, I will be happy to share the Belgium European system also with you if you want to see if how it is working there. But my thing is a little bit, I understand, because also the answer of the previous question, it's political, very difficult, but I also miss a little bit the environmental pressure to really do this on the plastic. I'm here for 2 years in Jakarta and I see it's improving, but still, in my view, not far enough. Thank you.
Any comment from Professor Preece or Pak Permana Agung?
I've just, yeah, I've had a little look at the excise system in Europe, because it's well, it's quite interesting because you are a single market. So I know ASEAN one day would like to aspire to be a single market with open borders, but not yet. So the European excise policy has been quite interesting to me in my studies, because there has to be some level of coordination across the 30-odd members. And they've done that through directives which cover alcohol, how you tax alcohol, cigarettes and petroleum fuels. And I think they're actually working on automobiles and plastic bags as an EU directive, but haven't got there yet. But still, individual countries are able to put excises on individual products like Belgium has with plastic and soda. It does, anyway, it was interesting to study the challenges in excise in a single market, and one day those challenges will be faced in ASEAN. But yeah, thank you for your contribution. Thank you.
Pak Permana Agung, any comment? Okay, we have a follow-up question here from Pak Yazid. Are you still with us, Pak Yazid? Pak Yazid, are you still here with us? Okay, you can ask your follow-up question.
Okay, thank you, sir, for the second opportunity, because I think Pak Permana hasn't catch what I really asked previously, because my question is actually to bring awareness. When we propose amendment to a law, sometimes it hit back on us, because during law number 11, Article 4, we already mentioned that to add objects of excise, it only needs governmental rules. After the amendment, it should be approved by the parliament. So it's a setback for us as an excise institution, I think. And currently, there is an issue that we are going to propose a new amendment to the law. So I think we should be aware, and must be noted, each of us, that when we try to do something good, we also should aware that maybe there's a sidetrack that will hinder us from doing what we want to do, want to achieve. And I want to ask, what is Permana? What is the story? My question is, what is the story when the amendment that we changed the Article 4 from the edition only required governmental rules to the parliamentary accession? Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Pak Yazid. Pak Permana Agung, are you catch the question? Oh, unmute.
Mohon izin Pak Permana Agung untuk praktekkan mute. Yeah, unmute. Yeah, need to unmute.
Okay. Gimana, Yud?
The question is about what is the story behind the change? Why we need parliament approval now when when the law changed? Why do we need a requirement from? Why we require parliament approval now for new excise goods?
Yeah, are we talking about law number 11, right? He mentioned law number 11, right?
Yeah.
Okay, as far as my understanding is that the final decision has to be made by Parliament, by DPR, right? Because this tax has to be based on the law, not others, not peraturan pemerintah, not government rules, has to be law. Probably that's of the reason the people suddenly realize that for the sake of the tax, any tax that try to confiscate some of the property of the people have to be based on the law, not on the government regulation, not on the department regulation. Probably that's the reason, that's the story why from government regulation have to move back to the parliament. My understanding is that because this one is try to confiscate, quote unquote, from the people, and that has to be based on the law. And the law has to be made by the lawmakers, which is DPR, which is parliament. Pak Yudhi?
Okay, thank you, Pak Permana Agung. We have our last question here. It will be asked by Andi Aryabima from our lab in Surabaya. Are you here, Andi Aryabima?
Good day, sir.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Firstly, I'm sorry that due to technical difficulty, I can show you my video. Well, thank you for the explanation from Professor Preece and Mr. Permana Agung. My name is Bima. I'm from Customs Laboratory. Thank you for many insight about the excise. Lately, I wondering. Lately, the topic of adding another goods to be imposed on excise is quite a hot topic. And lately, I wondering, what if we imposed on how we implement on goods that are widely used? For example, sugar. I mean, as we all know, sugar is quite easily accessed by our society to be a easy and cheap source to enjoy their day. And what I mean is that we as the regulator used to think about how to maintain the consumption of the effective and the efficient, but if we try to regulate their source of enjoyable goods, in this case like sugar and things and other goods like that contain sugar or sweeteners, could we face another impact like a protest from the society, from our customers, that it can create another dispute in our society? Especially today we face a quite big pandemic that affect our economic widely, and how we should impose this excise that we can be fair with the big industry, but also we can cover the local businesses that more or less they can support, they can build their local community. And based on Mr. Permana Agung about threshold, what if we try to impose this regulation based on threshold, but there are some groups that try to avoid the regulation to avoid the excise, but we can deny that statistically. I'm sorry, but the data says that the consumption is high. What's the solution for that? Thank you.
Okay, Professor Preece, Pak Permana Agung, you can answer that question.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. Start. I can 100% guarantee that if you propose an excise on sugar and sugar drinks, there will be uproar led by the sugar farmers and the industry that produces sugar sweet drinks, and maybe some consumer groups. I can absolutely guarantee that will happen. There will be people unhappy and complain. The other thing I need to tell you is that the research coming out now on the damage that health that sugar consumption is doing, particular sugar is entering people's bodies the fastest through sweetened beverages. The damage that's doing, diabetes and all sorts of terrible diseases, is becoming quite shocking, and it's putting quite a strain on the health budgets of governments as well. So through the excise system, you know, and placing excise, say, on sweet sodas and drinks, what you're doing is you're encouraging the manufacturers to perhaps reduce the level of sugar in their products, and therefore the consumers are taking less sugar with each they purchase, which has a positive health. But also, you know, it's sending a price signal to the consumers that, you know, I know you're enjoying this drink, but just understand that it has consequences for your teeth, for your heart, and for other organs in your body. And if you're prone to diabetes in the family, you're at risk at that. Be careful with your consumption. If you moderate your consumption, take notice of what you're drinking, these sugar beverages, then yeah, excise is working in that regard. But these are the sorts of arguments that need to be built with the health department, the experts, and then when you create your excise, to make sure you have that outcome of people reducing their intake and manufacturers reducing the sugar levels, you've got to make your excise tax policy work. So understanding your markets, building your modelling and so on, to start pushing back with credibility the arguments and protests that will come from these different parties. But yes, you will. I can guarantee protests.
Anything to add, Pak Permana Agung? Okay, I believe today we have a very rewarding webinar. Before we end our webinar, please allow me to deliver the wrap up. Excise extensification poses great challenges, no doubt about it. Accordingly, we need to be well prepared before we come to the parliament. We need to understand the nature of excise. We need to understand the market. Perhaps we need to understand the entire economic system, which is affected by excise. It is difficult, but it is justified, as Pak Permana Agung mentioned. And it is necessary because we need revenue for our development. So I really enjoy our webinar today. I hope you all feel the same way. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Now let us get back to Sulis and Nabila.
Thank you very much for our speakers. Thank you for delivering knowledge and joining our discussion today. And thank you to Mr. Yudhi as well. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big applause to all the amazing speakers and all of us. Thank you. Don't you think that it was an amazing discussion? We can't wait to meet you in the next event. Don't you think so, Nabila?
Yeah, that's very wonderful presentation from our speakers. And thank you so much also for all the participants who have joined this until the end. Yeah. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are already in the last part of the agenda. But before we end up the event, we will have a photo session for all the speakers and participants. We give a chance for all participants to turn on the camera. Okay. After that, you may take your best style as good as possible and get ready for photo session. Okay.
May I ask
Are you ready?
something?
Yeah.
Please, everyone, give the code of C. Cukai. It's Cukai.
Okay. Very good style. Okay, just like this, guys.
Yeah.
This or this?
Yeah.
Left.
Yeah.
Like this.
Yeah, left hand. Okay.
Okay, Mr. Didit, would you mind to take a picture of us?
Okay, thank you, Ms. Nabila. On my mark, everyone, I will take 3 pictures of you. I will take the first page, second and third. And please wait a minute, bear with me. In 3, 2, 1. Okay, that's 1, and then please wait. You may lower your hand first. I will take the second in a minute. In a second, I guess. Sorry. Okay, and then for the second part, in 3, 2, 1. Okay, and then for the third, sorry, in 3, 2, 1. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for Mr. Didit. And last but not least, we would like to express our gratitude to all the participants who have been joining our talk from the beginning until the end. And we also would like to say thank you for all the organizing committee that have been arranged this event. It's being an honor for me to have a good campus cooperation in this talk with you all. Thank you so much. And we remind you also for participants to fill the attendance list and the questionnaire on the link mentioned to get the certificate. Thank you very much once again and see you on the next talk. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Thank
Terima
you, Pak
kasih.
Permana Agung.
Thank you, salam
Yeah, you take care,
warahmatullahi
Yudhi. You
wabarakatuh.
take care.
Thank you, Mr. Preece.